Testing, testing, testing.
Good evening. How are you? You ready to learn about Thomas Brandon? Welcome to the Lawrence County Museum. I don't think this is new to any of you. We're glad to have you. And I hope you'll come back to our other events and lectures. I do want to put in a plug for our 20th anniversary birthday gala that's coming up August the 23rd. That's not this Saturday, it's next Saturday. There is still time, if you rush and hurry, to buy tickets to this wonderful event. Yeah, it's a little pricey, but it's a fundraiser. And we need to raise money to keep this museum going. So I encourage you, if you have not already done so, to call the office or get in touch with any of us, and we'll help you get tickets. We're going to have a band and lots of good food and just lots of good fun fellowship. So come on out. So welcome, Durant, once again.
Thank you, Teresa. I appreciate that. Testing, testing. Okay, so it's good to see everybody here this evening. We're going to be talking about Thomas Brandon from the 2nd Spartan Regiment. Now, many of you who have been to some of my lectures before know I don't do a lot of cussing in my lectures. And a general rule of mine in life is the less you cuss, the more effective it is. But in describing Thomas Brandon, about the only way you can, or the best way to describe him, is a fighting son of a bitch. If you were in a knockdown, drag-out fight, you wanted Thomas Brandon beside you. So there is not a lot of biographical information on Thomas Brandon. The best description of him comes from Lyman Draper, who wrote in 1880 a book called Kings Mountain and His Heroes. And Thomas Brandon was definitely a hero at Kings Mountain. And this is what Lyman Draper says about Thomas Brandon. Thomas Brandon, of Irish descent, was born in Pennsylvania in 1741. His parents with a colony of Irish Presbyterians. Now, entire colonies of Irish Presbyterians did come into the backcountry of South Carolina. Immigrated from that province to what is now Union County, South Carolina, in the period 1754 to 1755. Thomas Brandon was one of the original settlers in the backcountry in the 96th District, because in 1755, that's when the Treaty of Saluda was signed, and that's when this area was opened up for legal settlement. He had for several years to fought against the turbulent Cherokees. Serving in the early part of the Revolution, he rose in 1780 to the command of a regiment, acting much under Sumter. Retiring from that service with Colonel Williams, he shared in the affair at Musgrove Mill, then at Kings Mountain, Blackstocks, and Cowpens. In the latter, killing 3 of Tarleton's dragoons with his sword. After the war, he was a justice of the court, county ordinary, general of the militia, and frequently a member of one or the other branch of the legislature. He was a good soldier, but like Cleveland, a bitter enemy of the Tories, who received little mercy at his hands. Thomas Brandon did have a reputation for cruelty. He died at his residence on Fair Forest, February the 5th, 1802, in the 61st year of his age. Now, in addition to that short biography, there is a book that was written about Thomas Brandon and the 2nd Spartan Regiment. So, in Revolutionary War times, each district, each county was tasked with raising a regiment of soldiers. And there would be 500 names on these lists, and probably from 60 to 150 in the field at any one time. So the 1st Spartan Regiment was founded by John Thomas Sr. in 1776. And during this time, William Henry Drayton saw John Thomas Sr. drilling his men, and he said, look at those men, they look like Spartans. And so that is the name, origination of the name of the Spartan Regiment, and the origination of the name of Spartanburg City and County, South Carolina, because John Thomas Sr.'s men looked like Spartans. So, this 1st Spartan, or the Spartan Regiment, was in the thick of fighting. They fought in 37 battles throughout the Revolutionary War. And they were so popular that not only did they need the 1st Spartan Regiment, in February of 1779, Thomas Brandon organized a 2nd Spartan Regiment. Now, there are few districts or counties in America that have more than one regiment of militia volunteers or soldiers. They weren't really volunteers. But Spartan County did, 1st and 2nd Spartan Regiments. In addition to that, the Spartan Regiments had a battalion, which is a subset of a regiment, under Benjamin Roebuck. And this battalion fought at Cowpens, and we're going to be talking about that. So Oscar and Catherine Gilbert wrote this book about the 2nd Spartan Regiment, and Thomas Brandon as well. I'm going to say maybe it's a good book for beginners, if you will. There's not a lot of depth in a lot of these battles. They do go through the entire sequence, the order that in. And they also spent a lot of time looking at the pension applications of the individuals who fought with the 2nd Spartan Regiment, and gleaned a lot of interesting information from that. So I will tell you, there is this book that many of you will enjoy reading about the 2nd Spartan Regiment. So that's a little bit about the biography of Thomas Brandon. And one thing that you really can't do without talking about Thomas Brandon is discussing a relic from his era that has recently surfaced and been passed down to us. This is the flag of the 2nd Spartan Regiment. And I had the unique experience to see this flag in person at the Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia last summer. And I just happened to be there, and it just happened to be on display. It wasn't publicized. 1 week after that museum got possession of this flag, they had it on display. It was sort of a soft entrance, if you will. They weren't announcing that. And I was able to see this. Now, this flag is soon to be, if you will, into the possession of the Spartanburg Library System. And it will be on display. And hopefully it will be on tour. And people throughout the backcountry can see this flag in person. This flag was kept in the Brandon family, passed down in a cedar box from generation to generation. And on the inside of that box is written the name of which descendant had possession of that flag and who it was given to. So this is an extreme treasure that we do have. And I'm going to be talking more about this flag here shortly. So here you can see, it's hard to make out. It's 250 years old. But what we have is a dog and a snake in a standoff. We don't exactly know what these symbols mean. The dog could represent the Spartan dog that was in one of Shakespeare's plays, Othello. And of course, he could be attacking an evil snake. Or the snake could be Gadsden snake, don't tread on me, attacking a bull mastiff, which is the symbol of English power. But that's not a bull mastiff. But anyway, we don't exactly know what's going on with that. But to give you an example of how flags during this time period were portrayed, I mean, this is a very unique design. You're not going to see that replicated anywhere again. And I want you to pay particular attention to the stripes that we see, those 7 bars or stripes. What do they mean? We'll talk about it. I'm not really sure. Now, this is another famous flag from that era. This is the flag of the Virginia Third Continental Line. This is Abraham's Buford's flag that was captured by Banastre Tarleton at the Battle of the Waxhaws, May 29th, 1780. So, what does this flag represent? I will say there's sort of a cleaned up version, if you will, so you can see in a little bit more detail what we have here. And what we have here is a beaver chopping down a palm tree. And the beaver is thought to be the tenacity of the American patriots. The saying below there, perseverando, means it means you work real hard and keep doing it and you never stop. Anyway, I'm drawing a blank on that. Notice the stars as well. So there's 13 stars there, sort of in a haphazard fashion. So let's look at these two flags side by side from the same era. I will say that in 1777, the Flag Act was passed, which described how American flags should look. And of course, we credit Betsy Ross with developing the first flag. There's some question about that. But I'm going to read the 1777 resolution. Resolve that the flag of the 13 United States be 13 stripes, alternate red and white, and that the Union be 13 stars, white in a blue field, representing a new constellation. So you see on Buford's flag, white stars on a blue field, and it's quite possible that this was a faded blue, is why it looks like this. 13 stripes. There are 7 yellow shown here. And in between, there's 6 blue field. Whether that has anything at all to do with the 13 stripes representing the United States, I don't know. There's a lot of room for interpretation in both of these flags. But I did want to show you that just sort of as an aside, because in discussing the 2nd Spartan Regiment, it is important to discuss the flags as well. So here you can see the 7 judicial districts that occurred in South Carolina at the very beginning of the Revolutionary War. So the 96th district, this is what we talk about more than anything else. This is where Lawrence County was. It was referred to as a Little River District at that time. In the Constitution of 1776, the 96th district was divided into 4 districts. North of the Enoree, which is where Spartanburg and Union County and some of Cherokee County is, north of the Enoree was the Upper Spartan District. The Lawrence County, present-day Lawrence County, was a Little River District. Present-day Newberry County was the Lower 96th District. And then the counties down here that were left, Abbeville, Edgefield, Saluda, Greenwood, McCormick, and hope I didn't leave any out. These were the 96th district. So you had the 96th district, the lower 96th district, and the upper 96th district. The upper 96th district was also referred to as the Spartan district. And I just wanted to point out the area that the Spartan regiments were originated from. So this is a map of the different locations that the 2nd Spartanburg Regiment operated from. Testing. Make sure this newfangled thing works on me. It seems to be doing okay. So these are Thomas Brandon's battles, and actually there's not all of them. The 2nd Spartanburg Regiment, as I described, was formed in February of 1779. What was going on during this period? Primary was the fall of Savannah. And now the Loyalists and the British had a toehold in the South when Savannah fell, December 30th, 1778. As soon as that started to happen, the Loyalists in the backcountry were reinvigorated. And they came down with a fellow named John Boyd. They were coming down to join with the British in Augusta, because here now the British force was coming up to join them, and also to meet with 1,000 Creek Indians who never showed up. Bad communication going on then. But when John Boyd came down, he was chased by Andrew Pickens. John Boyd and his 600 men were defeated at the Battle of Kettle Creek, February 14th, 1779. Andrew Pickens was the commander in charge of the Patriot forces there. 350 Patriots defeated 600 Loyalists, and it was a huge victory. Thomas Brandon was not at this battle. He was in the process of organizing his regiment. But shortly thereafter, he was able to join up with Pickens and the Patriots, and he participated in Augusta, Briar Creek, which was a terrible defeat, and the second siege of Savannah, which was a terrible defeat as well. So, I did mention that there's not a lot of biographical information about Thomas Brandon. And there's not a lot of discussion about specific roles he had in some of these battles. However, there are a number of anecdotes that are told about Thomas Brandon, and I will mention those as well. So, when Charleston fell on May the 12th, 1780, it was the world turned upside down. Quickly, there were British forts established at Georgetown, Camden, 96, and Augusta. A ring of forts around Charleston. In addition to this, there were satellite forts from all of these major forts. And these satellite forts are where the plundering was occurring. When Charleston fell, those forts were established. 95% of the state of South Carolina was under British domination. They had a stranglehold on the state. They really did. And the only two areas of opposition were Thomas Sumter's camp in the Catawba Indian Reservation and Charles McDowell's camp on the North and South Carolina border. Charles McDowell was from North Carolina, and he came down with men, kind of a mobile camp, and he had North Carolinians and South Carolinians with him as well. So from Thomas Sumter's camp, and he was consulting with the governor of South Carolina, who was in exile in Hillsborough during this time. But from Thomas Sumter's camp, William Bratton and Richard Wynn and others fought the Battle of Huck's Defeat on July the 12th, 1780, and it was a glorious victory. It was the first time that militiamen defeated British provincials. At the same time that Huck's Defeat was occurring, from Charles McDowell's camp, there were 5 battles in 4 days that pushed British lines back 40 miles. This was July the 12th to July the 16th of 1780. July the 12th, Huck's Defeat. July the 12th, 5 battles in 4 days pushed British lines back 40 miles. So that's some interesting activity. This is just 2 months after Charleston fell. Let me see, is this picking up? I believe it is. I believe I'm going to use this for the rest of the evening. So, with that activity, with those victories on 2 different fronts, that got the attention of numerous patriots throughout the land, and in particular, Isaac Shelby and the Over Mountain men, were kind of interested in what was happening. So Isaac Shelby came over the mountain with at least 60 men to check things out. And he was also joined with Elijah Clark from Georgia to check things out. And these men came into McDowell's camp. The day after Shelby came into McDowell's camp, 10 days after those 5 battles I was discussing, July the 26th, Isaac Shelby and 600 men surrounded Fort Thickety with 93 men, well armed, who surrendered without firing a shot. August the 12th, maybe August the 8th, there was the Battle of Wofford's Iron Works, where Ferguson and Shelby had their first run-in. It was a running battle, somewhat inconclusive, but a running gun battle throughout Spartan County occurred then. So Isaac Shelby and his men now, Charles McDowell had moved his camp deeper into South Carolina onto the Broad River at Smith's Ford, and they had word that 40 miles away at Musgrove Mill on the Inaree River, maybe 20 miles or so from here, that there was a group of loyalists, 200 strong, that was camped there. So Isaac Shelby had his men signed up for 60 days, and their time was about to run out. And he wanted to make good use of those men, so a day or two before their time ran out, he decided that it would be a great idea to attack those loyalists at Musgrove Mill. In addition to that, there was Clark. Elijah Clark, thank you very much. Elijah Clark from Georgia and James Williams with the Little River Regiment in South Carolina. They lined up 200 patriots, and overnight they left and they rode 40 miles, and they got down to Musgrove Mill. Now, since there's not a lot of detailed autobiographical information about Thomas Brandon, I am going to be describing these battles that he fought in, particularly the battles between Musgrove Mill to Cowpens. So when Clark, Shelby, and Williams got down towards the British camp, sentries had seen their activity, shots were fired, the element of surprise was lost. In addition to that, Clark, Shelby, and Williams were informed that overnight the British had been reinforced with 300 provincials, trained men from, these were Americans, trained and supplied and equipped in the British way of fighting. So now these 200 patriots are facing 500 loyalists. They had ridden all night long, 40 miles, their horses were worn out. What do you do? And what they decided to do was construct a rudimentary breastworks right up through here out of sticks and rocks and so forth, and they deployed there. And they wanted to bring the Loyalists into that trap that they had set. And so in order to do that, they had Shadrach Inman from Georgia. He volunteered to lead a feint towards the British lines. And the British at this time were encamped along the banks of the Inneree at the ford which went over the Inneree. Now this is currently the bridge over Highway 56 is where this ford is. And the British were down on this side of the Inneree. So Shadrach Inman came down. He starts taunting the British. They start shooting at him. He turns around and goes back. But they hold their position. He comes down, taunts them again. They shoot at him. He goes back. The third time he did that, the Loyalists had enough of that. So they started chasing him. And they started chasing him with all that they had. And they're marching up after him. When they get 110 yards away from these breastworks, at that point, the British stop and they fire a volley with their muskets, which are accurate to 80 yards, but not 110, and every one of those shots missed. So I assume that they reloaded and continued to march forward. The Patriots behind the breastworks held their fire. And as the Loyalists were approaching their lines, this field was a fallow field. It had been abandoned, and it was rough. It was unlevel, and it was impossible to maintain a solid line going forward. But when the majority of these men got 50 yards from that breastworks, then the order was given to fire, and a devastating volley caused incredible damage to the Loyalists who were attacking, and they were stunned. Their commander, Alexander Ennis, was able to rally them, and he started making progress, particularly on the British left flank, and he got to within 10 yards of the Patriot lines when he was shot. He was shot in the back of the neck, and he was unhorsed. And when he went down, the British lost all cohesion. And the Patriots started chasing after them and chasing after them. So of those 500 British that were there, half of that force was killed, wounded, or captured. It was a decisive victory. Now, one of Thomas Brandon's anecdotes, as the British were retreating, as they got on the opposite side of the river, one of those Loyalists decided to exhibit an indecent body posture. So Thomas Brandon was offended by that, and he went to one of his nearby neighbors there, a fellow named Golding Tinsley, who was the best shot in the Patriot Army. And he said to Tinsley, he says, "Do you think you can roll that fella over now?" And Golding Tinsley said, "Well, I believe I can." And he loaded up his rifle, he took careful aim, and he fired. And in the history of the state of South Carolina, we know that this is the earliest time that the Carolina moon has ever been set. So that's one of Thomas Brandon's stories. But that was an overwhelming victory. And this victory occurred, some say August 18th, some say the 19th. It occurred at the same time that the Battle of Fishing Creek occurred, where Thomas Sumter, with 700 men, was totally defeated by Banastre Tarleton with 170 men. Fishing Creek was a horrible disaster. There were 50% casualties at Fishing Creek, and Sumter lost all his supplies and 300 head of cattle and sheep and 50 wagons that he had captured earlier. It was devastating. And Fishing Creek happened 2 days after the Battle of Camden, in which the Second Continental Army coming down to help South Carolina was obliterated. Camden, Fishing Creek, that's the lowest point in Patriot forces in the American Revolution. But Musgrove Mill occurred on that day. Musgrove Mill was a ray of hope. The Patriots were energized based on what happened at Musgrove Mill. And I'll tell you what, too. After Musgrove Mill, there were no Patriot setbacks till the end of the war when Benedict Arnold burned Richmond. Battle after battle after battle. They were not all victories. Now remember, I said setbacks. Greene's battles, Guilford Courthouse, Hobkirk's Hill, 96, Eutaw Springs, these were all technical defeats. Tactical defeats, but strategic victories. And after every one of those 4 battles, the British had to retreat till they were holed up in Wilmington and holed up in Charleston. Not a single setback after Musgrove Mill. We talk about the turning points of the war, and I do not want to denigrate Kings Mountain and Cowpens. But when you look at the sequence of victories, not a single setback after Musgrove Mill. So Musgrove Mill infuriated Cornwallis. Here he thought he had South Carolina totally in its grip, and he was furious over this. So he was going to teach South Carolina a lesson. And from his base, and he was about in Camden at this time, heading towards Charlotte, he sent James Weems on his right flank on a retribution mission, if you will. James Weems went through the Chirals, and he burned 50 houses in 50 days. It's Wemyss and pronounced Weems. And on his left flank, Cornwallis had Patrick Ferguson. These 2 flanks were defending the army, but they were also trying to rectify in Cornwallis's mind what happened at Musgrove Mill. So he has Patrick Ferguson go up into North Carolina, chasing after Isaac Shelby, the Overmountain men, who had won at Musgrove Mill, and Ferguson and Cornwallis couldn't stand that. When Ferguson found out there was 2,000 men at Sycamore Shoals banding together to come in opposition to him, he starts retreating. And this is when the Overmountain men come over the mountain, and they join up with the North Carolina men who had come in from Elkin, North Carolina. And Ferguson is retreating until he gets to Kings Mountain, which he feels like is an impregnable position. And the Overmountain men, the North Carolina men, they gather together at Cowpens. The South Carolina men join them. Now there's 2,000 men at Cowpens, which is 30 miles from Kings Mountain. And they know where Patrick Ferguson is. And they take their best 1,000 men and they march them towards Kings Mountain. And this is what we have here is the Battle of Kings Mountain. the Patriots came in 2 different columns. And as this column, this would have been under Hambright and the First Chronicle, William Chronicle. They came here, Winston, Sevier, Campbell, Cleveland. Then there was Lacey and Hawthorne, Sumter's men. And then there was James Williams and Thomas Brandon, South Carolina men, attacking up the flanks of Kings Mountain. And this is where Brandon was as he came on through. So that was a decisive victory. There were 129 killed at Kings Mountain. Some folks say 100 of those loyalists who were killed after the white flag was raised, but it's impossible to say when that white flag was raised. The 600 prisoners, they had their shoes taken from them. This is October the 7th. They had their shoes taken from them, and they were forced to carry 2 Brown Bess muskets with the flints removed, and they were marched towards the prison camps in Virginia. A week after that battle, when the Over-Mountain men were getting ready to split off from the North Carolina and so forth, the Patriot forces under Benjamin Cleveland and Isaac Shelby and others, the colonels, the 10 colonels, they had what could only be described as a kangaroo court, and they sentenced 34 of the Loyalist officers to be hung. And the next morning, they started hanging them 3 at a time. And by the time they had hung 9, they kind of had enough of that. And Isaac Shelby took his men, and he went over the mountain. The North Carolinians continued to escort the prisoners, but as they got to their home, they split off. The South Carolinians never went in the first place. There was nobody left to guard these prisoners. And of those 600 prisoners, every one but 60 of them, who probably were too sick and wounded to move, they all escaped. So those men from Kings Mountain came back into where they started from. And most of them went back to the fort at 96. So Kings Mountain was a huge blow to Cornwallis. And he had to retreat from North Carolina. He thought he had South Carolina whipped. But after Kings Mountain, he retreats back to Winnsboro, which is halfway between Charlotte and Columbia. And as he's there, and why Winnsboro? Because it hadn't been plundered, and it was right for the pickings, and that's where he went. And while he was there, he was raiding the mill so he could get flour and wheat for his army. Well, during this time, Thomas Sumter was at the Catawba Indian Reservation, not too far from Winnsboro, and he was raiding mills as well. And Sumter's men and Cornwallis's men were running into each other, creating quite confrontation and friction between the two. So at one point, Cornwallis had Weems attack Sumter's camp, and that actually happened a little bit later than what I'm getting ready to describe right here. There was Cornwallis and Sumter fighting with each other, and Cornwallis had enough of that. He wanted his best man to go after Sumter, and his best man was none other than Banastre Tarleton. Now, at this particular time, Banastre Tarleton was going after Francis Marion. But Cornwallis gave Tarleton orders to go after Sumter now, and Sumter and Tarleton was just happy to do that because he said even the devil himself couldn't catch that damned old fox. And it was Banastre Tarleton who gave Francis Marion the nickname the Swamp Fox. So now Tarleton is going after Sumter. And Sumter knows he's coming, so he starts retreating, and he starts retreating west. And as he's falling back, he's in territory he hadn't been in before. So he's talking to his men and says, hey, Tarleton's coming. Where should we make a stand to receive him? And Thomas Brandon said, I know the perfect place. And the perfect place was Blackstock's plantation or homestead. And this is a sketch of the Blackstock's battlefield. Now, there were several defensive advantages to Blackstock's. For one, Mr. Blackstock's home place was built as a 2-story log cabin with thick, heavy logs. And in addition to that, Farmer Blackstock had fenced off his fields with heavy, heavy logs. And that's what you can see here is the fencing that Blackstock's had on his plantation. So when I first saw this, I thought, oh, well, he's raising horses and cattle and he's keeping them fenced in there. No, that wasn't it. He was growing corn and other vegetables. And his fencing was so big and so massive that it was to keep the deer out, which has to be 8 to 10 feet tall. I mean, he had huge fencing all around his vegetable fields. So that's the way this was laid out. In addition to that, there was a building here that could serve as an outpost, and there was a hill here. There's 3 hills on this Blackstock's property. This hill was where we think the Blackstock Cemetery was, but it was an elevation. And this hill and the home was on a hill. This is the Colonial Road right here. It comes right up through the middle of this homestead. And it went over a ford on the Tiger River. So that's why this road was here, and that's why Mr. Blackstock's was here. So when Thomas Sumter saw this, he knew that he had a very good defensive setup. Thomas Sumter had 1,000 men, and he was being chased by Banastre Tarleton with his legion. Tarleton's legion was 450 strong. A legion consists of cavalry, infantry, or dragoons that frequently rode to battle on the backs of the cavalry horses, and artillery. So he had 100 or so, maybe 150 cavalry horses that he mounted about 120 of his foot soldiers on. He had a total of 270 men. And he left his artillery behind, and he left his infantry behind that didn't have rides on the back of a horse. So now he's down to 270 men. And he's attacking Sumter's 1,000 men set up in this defensive position right here. Well, just a short while ago, he had defeated Sumter with 170 men. Now he's got 270 men. The battle started with the 63rd Regiment of Foot coming across this 60-acre field right here. They skirmished or fought with John Twiggs from Georgia with his men in that field. They started pushing the Georgians back. When they got so close, now the sharpshooters in the home place here are able to start picking off the 63rd Regiment as they're approaching. And in addition, Sumter sends Richard Wynn from in reserve. He sends them in to aid the Georgians as well. And the loyalists there in that 60-acre field are stymied. And John Money, I believe he was a major in charge, 24 years old, one of Cornwallis's favorite guys. He was seriously wounded, and he was laying down in the field. Now, this is an act of bravery on Banastre Tarleton's part, because he did ride into that field, and he picked up John Money, put him on his horse, and they rode away all the time under fire from those sharpshooters in the Blackstock's home place. And a day or two after the battle, John Money did die. So the 63rd was thwarted. But at the same time, the 71st Regiment of Foot over here, they are advancing. And as they're advancing, they're looking at the activity that's going on over here. But what they did not know, that Edward Lacey and his regiment were hidden in the woods here. You know, when you have 1,000 men versus 270, it's easy to outflank somebody. And this regiment was outflanked, and Lacey and his men let loose a volley, and that was devastating to the 71st Regiment, and they had to retreat. So now Tarleton is down with only one option in his mind. And this is when Tarleton does what Tarleton does the most and what he has done the best up until this point. And he charges his cavalry, the British Legion, through the center of this battlefield, right down this lane. And as his men are charging down the lane, the first horse gets shot. Now, where do you go? That's a bottleneck. The fences on either side are 8 to 10 feet tall. And then the last horse gets shot. And so the men inside this chute of death are just picked off one after another, and it was devastating. And the British Legion knew that Tarleton had led them into a death trap, and that had an important role at Cowpens 2 months afterwards. So of those 270 men, Tarleton had 92 killed and 100 wounded, and only about 70 came through that battle unscathed. After Blackstock's, the Third Continental Army was coming down. George Washington sent Nathaniel Greene and his best men down to alleviate the problems in South Carolina. After Blackstock's, the Georgians went back to Georgia. Twiggs, Few, and Clark. And with them were Samuel Hammond of the lower 96th Regiment, Newberry County, and James McCall with an independent group of Rangers. 500 men there all together. This is when shootout at Rutledge Ford occurs. The Battle of Long Cane, which was a Patriot defeat. Clark was defeated. He was seriously wounded during that battle. The Loyalist forces were uplifted because they had won at the Battle of Long Cane. The commander in 96, John Harris Kruger, former mayor of New York City, he wrote a letter to Cornwallis and said, "I have desired the militia to scour the country." And from that, we know that Kruger ordered Loyalists under the command, and it's hard to say, but Thomas Waters from Georgia is usually given credit as being the Loyalist commander, but the pension applications list 6 different men who were the commander of this plundering mission up into the Fair Forest region of Spartanburg County, Spartan District. This is currently, or now, Union County of South Carolina. So there's a band of 250 plundering Loyalists in the backcountry of South Carolina. At this time, Daniel Morgan and his 1,000 Continentals are on Grendel Shoals in Spartan County. And George Washington, Nathaniel Greene sees William Washington the Continental Army's best cavalry, 3rd Continental Light Dragoons, 80 men strong. He sends them to join with Daniel Morgan. And as William Washington goes through the Fair Forest District, Thomas Brandon's home place, he sees the destruction that these Tories had created. And he says to Daniel Morgan, the distress of the women and children stripped of their possessions begs for redress. And Daniel Morgan says, heck yeah, go ahead, redress. So William Washington starts to chase after those Tories. Now, in addition to that, he has 200 local mounted militia. He has Joseph Hayes and the Little River militia. He has Samuel Hammond and the Lower 96 militia. And he has Thomas Brandon and the 2nd Spartan Regiment. These 200 mounted riflemen work under the command of James McCall. And he has these men going after those plundering Tories. And the Tories know that he's coming. So they start retreating. And they retreat 20 miles till they get right here in Lawrence County, about 10 or 12 miles from here, at the only store in the district, which is Leroy Hammond's old store. And when the Tories get there, they break for a noonday meal. So while the Tories had covered 20 miles, William Washington had covered 40 miles. And the morning of December the 30th, 1780, he runs across some stragglers or the rear guard of the Tories at Hurricane Baptist Church. And from them, he gets information that the Tories are just a few miles ahead at Hammond's old store. So here comes Washington coming after them. Here are his 80 men. Now, in addition to the 80 men charging down the Colonial Road, he has his mounted riflemen spread to the flanks. These are where the mounted riflemen are. They dismount. They have their rifles loaded. And from 200 yards away, they see those Tories on the crest of a hill where Hammond's old store is. They're all laid out. 200 yards wide is their position, about 50 yards deep. And as when William Washington crested the opposite hill over the Bush River, he gave a shout and charged like a madman with his Continental Dragoons right behind him. And as the mounted riflemen spread out on the flanks, they let loose a devastating volley of rifle balls, musket balls, shotgun pellets into those ranks. And as soon as that volley hit, now William Washington is right on top of them, armed with swords and swords only. Hammond's old store was an overwhelming victory. And as there were 250 Tories to begin with. There were 150 of them killed or wounded, 40 captured, 60 escaped, and they fought another battle against Joseph Hayes at Fort Williams the next day. So we've done archaeological studies at the Battle of Hammond Old Store, and that's a little blurry, but you can. This is where the Tories were. There's a battle site here, but this whole area was a battle site. Erosion has eliminated the artifacts within this particular area. And I will say that these artifacts are here at the museum now and are going to be displayed in the Revolutionary War exhibition that's going to be great here. So Hammond's Old Store occurred 18 days before Cowpens. And As a result of Cowpens, the Patriots in the back, or of Hammond's Old Store, the Patriots in the backcountry were spirited up. And that was Morgan's goal all along. And 1,000 Patriots came into Morgan's camp. On the Loyalist side, there were only 50 Loyalists who joined up with Banastre Tarleton. Now, he's going after Morgan. And Tarleton has 1,000 men this time, some of the best that the British have to offer. And Morgan started with 1,000 men. Now he's got 2,000 men. So for some reason, I'm not advancing here. Let's see. Okay. I don't know what I did, but anyway. So, the Battle of Cowpens was the South Carolina militia's finest hour. And Thomas Brandon was right in the thick of that. He was immensely heroic at Cowpens. And one of the reasons for the success at Cowpens is the genius of Daniel Morgan. This battle is taught at West Point to this day, and it is a perfect example of how you could and should fight. Morgan came up with a plan that is regarded as defense in depth. He had trained Continentals. He had the top of the line Continentals, the 1st and 2nd Maryland Regiments and Kirkwood's Delawareans and Virginia Continentals. These guys were the best of the best. So he knew that he had this corps he could defend on. But he also had 1,000 militiamen, untrained, very experienced, knowing how to work in teamwork with William Washington and James McCall, because 18 days before they had performed brilliantly at Hammond's Old Store. Daniel Morgan knew his men. He knew the advantages of the militia, and he knew the disadvantages of militia. He knew that they had rifles that could shoot accurately for 200 yards and take 60 seconds to load. There were many things you could do with those rifles, many things you could not do. Daniel Morgan understood that. And this is how and why he laid out his plans for Cowpens. First of all, you've got North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia militiamen as sharpshooters. Samuel Hammond's lower 96 Regiment on the left flank, and Joseph McDowell and his North Carolina sharpshooters on the right flank. These sharpshooters were in groups of 3. One load, one shoot, one halfway loaded, one getting ready to load. But of these groups, there was always one fella who had a charged load that could pick off the British officers as they started advancing. That was their orders. Aim for the epaulettes. So that's what these skirmishers did. They forced the British to transition from column formation into line formation. That slows them down. They're sitting ducks. They're being picked off. Now the skirmishers, the sharpshooters, they get pushed back into the Patriot lines. Here's our Joseph Hayes, Little River Regiment. He advances 50 paces forward to create a gap so the skirmishers can come through and not disrupt the militia line. Banastre Tarleton, as he's approaching, this spot on the battlefield here at Cowpens is called Hayes Rise. It was an elevated location. And Joseph Hayes was there at Hayes Rise. And when Bannister Tarleton comes up, he sees Hayes' Little River Regiment, 60, 150 men, something like that. So Tarleton sees that, and he sees nobody else. He sees the skirmishers running past Joseph Hayes, and he thinks all he's faced with is Joseph Hayes and his regiment as a rear guard while Daniel Morgan is escaping towards the Broad River. So Tarleton deploys his line. 17th Light Dragoons, the Legion Infantry, the Light Infantry, the 7th Regiment of Foot. He's got the 71st Regiment of Foot in reserve. Now, this is the best of the best right here. These guys are winners, very experienced. And then Ogilvy's company of the British Legion is cavalry on the left. 17th Light Dragoon Cavalry on the right, Ogilvy's company on the left. And he starts marching them forward. As he does that, Hayes retreats back into line. Now, knowing the terrain of Cowpens, there's a ridge right here, so to speak. I would put my men on top of the ridge shooting down. Daniel Morgan didn't do that. He had his men on the reverse slope of that ridge. He had his men on what is referred to as the military crest. So when Tarleton and his men approach, half of these men's bodies are hidden by the way the terrain is laid out. So Tarleton doesn't know what he's marching into. And here he comes, starts marching away. These men are armed with their hunting rifles. Some of them have muskets. So as the light infantry advances, Thomas Brandon and his men let loose a devastating volley. And there is a line of dead redcoats on the field right there where that volley was discharged. But then John Thomas Jr. in the 1st Spartan Regiment, he lets loose a volley. There's another line of dead redcoats. Joseph Hayes' volley. Benjamin Roebuck's volley of the Roebuck's Battalion of the Spartan Regiment. The burial party remarked over the lines of dead in the field. And this is where Tarleton suffered his greatest casualties in the militia line. Well, you shoot your volley, now you've got to reload. If you've got a rifle, that's going to take 60 seconds. And these men are 50 or 60 yards away from you. They can cover that distance in 5 or 6 seconds. As the British start to come on, Brandon and his men, half of his men, probably the men armed with muskets, they get off a 5th volley, which does slow down the advance. I mean, when those volleys were loose, these men were shocked. They shuddered. But they're trained, they're professional, and they gather their senses and they keep marching. The books say that Daniel Morgan was given orders, fire 2 shots, my lads, and then you can go kiss your girlfriends. Well, they didn't do that. They fired 1 shot, and then they retreated. Because if they'd waited to fire a 2nd shot, they would have been bayoneted to death, because these guys are coming on with bayonets. So they retreated, and Tarleton sees them retreat. He thinks he's got Camden all over again, that devastating loss at Camden. Tarleton thinks Camden all over again. Look at those guys leaving the field. So he immediately sends the 17th Light Dragoons into the left flank of the Patriot lines, and that's where Thomas Brandon is. This is the entire Battle of Cowpens. There's a lot of moving parts to Cowpens. This is Cowpens on one page. Here's Brandon's regiment, and they're falling back. And as they fall back, the 17th Light Dragoons, they come charging right into them. This is where Thomas Brandon is fighting off 50 men of the 17th Light Dragoons, who are the best cavalry unit that the British have in America. They had 300 to begin with. They got 50 experienced veterans here at Cowpens. Now, as William Washington, in reserve, sees the 17th Light Dragoons charging into Brandon's men, William Washington charges. And he charges and he catches the 17th Light Dragoons in the flank. And those men are cut to pieces between Thomas Brandon, who is probably the only man in his regiment with a sword. Maybe some captains did. But he's fighting these off, and this is where Thomas Brandon kills 3 of those 17th Light Dragoons with his sword. William Washington and his men kill 10 more. And now the 17th Light Dragoons retreat. They can't sustain those losses, and they're out of the battle for the rest of the time. The orders were for the militia to retreat all the way back. Their horses were back there. If it was a defeat, they could jump on their horses and ride home. If it's a victory, they stay on the field. They gather under Andrew Pickens. He collects them in this chaos of the battle, and he marches them all the way around to this flank. And this is part of the double envelopment. Now you have Tarleton, after he's decimated by the militia line, he comes upon the Continental line, and this is where they get another devastating volley. And this is where Tarleton's men are defeated. It's a double envelopment with the South Carolina militia on this wing, the Continentals in the front, and William Washington and his men on this wing. The only thing Tarleton has left in his gas tank at this time is the British Legion, 3 additional companies. Ogilvy's company got seriously defeated by James McCall here, but he still has 3 companies in reserve. Just like at Blackstock's, he orders them to charge right into the middle of the battlefield, and they refuse. And that was the end of the battle. Now, Tarleton and William Washington did get in a sword fight at the end of the battle as Washington was chasing Tarleton and so forth. And that was a very dramatic moment. But that is how Cowpens ended. And Thomas Brandon was right in the thick of this. This is one of his most glorious moments. So with that, we will call it an evening, but I did want to see if anybody had any questions. Well, since there are no questions, David, did you have one?
Do you know who the W. Candler was at Kings Mountain?
Yes, the question was who was Candler at Kings Mountain, and he was the Georgia leader. There were 25 or 30 Georgians at Kings Mountain, and Candler was their leader, and he fought under James Williams with the South Carolina militia during that time. Yes?
One of the things that I don't like about Draper, and I don't like,
Yeah.
you started off by quoting him,
Yes.
saying Brandon was an Irish Presbyterian. No,
He wasn't an Irish Presbyterian?
no. There were Irish Catholics and there were Scotch-Irish Presbyterians.
Okay. So the point is that Brandon wasn't a Irish Presbyterian. He was a Scotch-Irish Presbyterian. I can imagine.
An
Thank you.
important distinction to both people.
Well, Draper's got a number of inaccuracies. There's no question about that. But there's nobody else that's got a better biography of Thomas Brandon, because I know, because I've looked. So we thank you for that. Yes? Where did Tarleton go after this? He went back to Cornwallis, and after Cowpens is when the race to the Dan began. Daniel Morgan and Nathaniel Greene joined up in North Carolina, and they went to the Dan. And Bannister Tarleton was involved in the race to the Dan. He was, working with Cornwallis the whole time during that campaign. And then he went to Wilmington with Cornwallis, and then up to Yorktown when Cornwallis went up there as well. Well, I thank everybody for your attention and your presence here tonight. So thank you very much. Thank you.